Hello, folks. My name is Rick Pearson, and this is Prophecy USA, a podcast specifically designed to unveil the hidden mystery of America's role in Bible prophecy. For those of you that are new to our podcast, we'd like to invite you to our website, rickpearson.com, where you can get free TV videos, you can get free podcast videos, you can get a free list of all 53 biblical descriptions of Babylon the Great and how America meets every description. And we would like to encourage you to please let us know where you're from, your city, your state, or even your country. And we'd also like to thank those who are subscribing to our channel and, of course, supporting us both with your prayers, with your financial support. It's greatly appreciated. You know, historically, prophets in the Bible were demanded by God to speak truth to power. And most of those in power were located in the local government structure. Well, today, we have a man who has spent 25 years in that political power structure, and he's going to speak to us from a political viewpoint concerning Israel, the current trends in our culture, and of course the global trends that we're watching happen on a daily basis. Our guest today is from the province of Alberta, Canada, close to 2,000 miles away. And of course, we're going to hear the political views from this man, but Prophecy USA is concerned with the spiritual views. So as he's talking, we're going to be showing you a little bit of prophecy on the screen. And as he's talking from a political viewpoint, you may see some scriptures come up that confirm what's happening from a spiritual standpoint. So without any further ado, from the province of Alberta, with our guest from the Canadian government, and you are there. Our guest today was elected 9 times over 25 years at 2 different levels of Canadian government and in 2 separate provinces. From 1986 to 2000, he served in the Alberta legislature as the government House Leader, the Minister of Labor, the Minister of Social Services, and the Minister of Finance. In 2001, he won the leadership of the Canadian Alliance Party and became leader of Canada's official opposition party in our House of Commons. And in that process, he increased its popular vote by over 1 million people. By 2002, he was appointed Foreign Affairs Critic and chair of the Subcommittee on Human Rights. Soon after that, the Alliance Party merged with the Progressive Conservative Party to become the Conservative Party of Canada. And thereafter, he was appointed Minister of Public Safety. But in 2008, he did not seek re-election, and now he operates a very successful consulting agency called Stockwell Day Connex Limited. Stockwell is a national and international media commentator. Stockwell, we are highly honored to have you on our program. Welcome to Prophecy USA.
It's my honor to be with you. Thank you.
You know, recently, Stockwell, I heard you at the March for Israel, and that was in Toronto, where over 50,000 pro-Israel enthusiasts marched in solidarity for the support of Israel. And in your speech, you were politically correcting much of the misinformation that's being presented by the anti-Semitic pro-Hamas activists who are literally protesting around the world against Israel's current conflict with Hamas. And I thought it would be great to have you on and explain some of those talking points to our viewers by way of direct questions. So the first question that I have is, anti-Semitic protesters constantly state that Israel is an apartheid nation. Number one, what exactly does apartheid mean? And is Israel an apartheid nation?
Well, great question, Rick. And I am as mystified as you are that some of the mainstream narratives that go out, not just in the U.S. and Canada, but globally, can be so completely off target. I mean, the word apartheid is actually, it's an Afrikaans word, goes back to the 40s, and it was describing the policy of the government in South Africa at the time, which is quite literally, if you look at that word apart, people are kept apart, and height is actually So neighborhoods that were separated apart and not allowed to be part of the flow of society. So apartheid was a vicious and toxic policy, which thankfully was finally removed. So to try and suggest that some kind of apartheid approach to politics or religion or society in general exists in Israel is just completely unfounded. Just on a couple of things alone, Rick. First of all, anybody who lives in Israel, including the Muslim population, which they are significant there, everybody can vote. It's the only
Yes.
democracy in that entire part of the world. Not only can anybody vote, Muslims can actually run for office, and they do, and they sit in the Knesset, and at times, like right now, they actually form part of coalition governments, making laws, making rules, and in a truly democratic way. It's not apartheid at all. It's interesting to know your viewers may or may not be aware that Muslims who are in Israel can actually sit on the Supreme Court, and they have. So you can have Muslims making laws at the Supreme Court level that actually overrule the lives of or rule the lives of all people in Israel. So not only is Israel the only democracy in that part of the world, they truly allow all faiths to be involved in the political process. And then it's not just on the political process. Rights of women are fully acknowledged. Those are not apartheid or racist at all. I mean, as we know, Israel had a female prime minister at one point. The rights of minorities, for instance, gay groups, LGBTQ groups, fully recognized. And those folks are full participants in society in Israel, which is a bit ironic and a little bit, I find a bit heartbreaking too, Rick, to see when I see groups in Canada and the US, for instance, chanting that they are queers for Palestine. Well, people can identify, as you know, as they wish in the United States and in
Yes.
Canada, but you can't in the areas which any of the Arab countries, any of the Muslim countries, certainly not in the area which we would call Palestine today. Matter of fact, those people would be killed if they were flown there right now and stood in the middle of Gaza and proclaimed what they do, they would be killed. So the fact that mainstream media is so negligent in showing the error of that term apartheid, it is alarming, and it allows people to get all worked up unnecessarily based on something that is completely not true.
So in other words, there's no gay parades in Gaza.
Rick, I could tell you a gay parade would be a very short-lived one in Gaza, and it would not be a pretty sight what would happen to those folks. Matter of fact, whether people like it or not, Tel Aviv, for instance, full-on gay pride parades that would exist anywhere else in the world. So it's interesting you mentioned that one. That would absolutely not exist. And this has recently been articulated by some of the Islamic leaders in Gaza and in the Palestinian so-called areas, very strong by their lead mullahs just recently coming out in broadcasts talking about this would be the death penalty. This would not be permitted. And yet it is taken without question in North America and European media that you can say you are a queer for Palestine, when in fact, no, you would be dead in Palestine or
They would kill
Palestinian
you.
areas.
They would literally
Right.
kill you.
They would.
Wow. Okay, on May 14th, 1948, everyone knows that Israel officially became a nation through the UN, who recognized them. But today, we hear the UN being referring to Israel as occupiers of the Palestinian land. So historically and politically, who are the original people of modern day Israel and who are the occupiers?
Well, again, Rick, you're hitting on some of the key points here, which, again, for reasons, I mean, we could explore for hours why mainstream media refuses just to look at the historical and archaeological evidence. And when we did the documentary just recently, I've done it in such a way that you can be an atheist or a believing Jew or a believing Christian, and still understand and agree on the historicity here.
Yes.
Everybody agrees on terms of the archaeology and the history. I mean, Abraham existed almost 4,000 years ago, 3,750, let's say. It was 2,700 years after Abraham, 2,700 years, that's almost 3 millennia, that we see the arriving on the scene of as he's called, the Prophet Muhammad in about
Yes.
670 AD. And that's a long time. That's a long period of time. That land that was promised to Abraham, and then as we follow through history, the history of the Hebrew and the Jewish people in terms of maintaining that land, having that land, settling that land for hundreds, actually thousands of years. There's no dispute on that. And for people to say that somehow the Jewish people are occupying it, they've had that land for, as I've said, for just under 4,000 years. And a very late arrival on the scene was the Prophet Muhammad. And then, as we know, that his branch of Islam being very militant, they began to conquer and had widespread success in military, in their military conquest, eventually conquering Jerusalem. And then from that period of him conquering Jerusalem, for about the next 200 years, there were 9 separate crusades, and it was a back and forth. The so-called Crusaders winning Jerusalem back for Christianity and the Jewish people who lived there, and then the Islamic forces, and it was back and forth. But even in all of those periods, Rick, at no time was that land completely vacated by the Jewish people. There has always been a remnant there. When Islamic rule finally took hold, and you see the so-called Ottoman Empire, and about the 1450s and coming into the 1500s, they actually ruled there for 400 years with Jewish people still living on that land. Of course, the Ottoman Empire ruled wide swaths of lands, not just that tiny little portion that we call Israel. In the First World War, the Ottoman Empire and their leaders made the wrong choice, picked the wrong choice, picked Germany and lost. And it was after that, Rick, that all of the nations which were involved then in settling and the peace accords after the First World War decided that Britain would have the mandate to decide who would actually be officially recognized in that land. And it was said back then in the 20s by the British government and under the foreign minister by the name of Balfour, that eventually this was going to be settled and Israel would be officially recognized, not just biblically, but would be officially recognized as the holders of that land, as the
Yes.
true inhabitants of that land, something that had been a case for thousands of years. And then, as you said, that brought it up to the vote the vote took place actually in 1947 at the United Nations. The majority of nations says, yes, we recognize the Jewish right to exist in Israel as a Jewish state. And that brings us, it was that, long history of hundreds, if not thousands of
Yes.
years, which eventually got United Nations recognition, and then Israel being declared as Israel as a Jewish state in 1948.
So right now, present day, we have Jewish people living in Israel who are called Zionists. And then we have another group in Gaza called Palestinians, and Palestinians also live in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was named by King David 1,000 years before Christ. So where and when did the name Palestinians come from?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating part of history, and it's one in which people, your viewers who may have gone to Sunday school and then gone on with their studies of the Bible will know that, for instance, at the time of David, you mentioned David, there had been for some period of time an alliance of 5 cities in that particular area of the world. They were constantly battling the people of Israel, battling the various kings. And well, we remember when David took on Goliath, the Philistine, because that area was called
Philistines.
Philistia, where these 5 cities, for quite a period of time, they would form alliances on a regular basis. Sometimes they would go to battle individually, sometimes on the basis of their alliance. But that's where you first heard that term, one of the cities in that area being called Philistia. And so the Philistines, what happened to them, it was under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, 604 BC, that particular area of the Middle East was overwhelmed by Nebuchadnezzar and his armies, completely overwhelmed the treaty of those 5 cities, absorbed them actually right into the Babylonian Empire. And effectively, they were never heard of, or that terminology was never used again until, very interesting point in history, under Roman rule. So picture now you've got the Romans, and they're ruling much of the world, the known world as we know it. In the year 132 BC, and I'm using the before Christ, or we can say before the Common Era,
Right.
under Simon Bar Kokhba, very famous, very celebrated Jewish rebel leader, under Simon Bar Kokhba, the Jewish people did quite well in terms of threatening and pushing back the Roman Empire, pushing the Roman legions out of the area that we would call Israel. But the Romans would have nothing to do with that. At first, they were surprised by this upstart, and then they said, that's it, we're done with that. And they sent many legions in, conquered, completely overwhelmed the Jewish resistance. They went as far as and even Caesar going into the temple, setting up their gods like Jupiter. And at that point in time, as a supreme insult to the Jewish people, it was the Roman government who declared that area now. They called it Syria Palestina, Syria being the form of Syria. And it was an insult, it said, because they knew the history somewhat. And this was a supreme insight. They took away any other designation. They said, this is what you're going to be known as. So even at the time of Jesus, where, of course, Jerusalem and Israel was settled almost entirely by the Jewish people, this is how they were designated by the Roman government. That's where that term came from and lasted for many years. But the Jewish people, as we know, did not depart from there. They still lived there. Very interesting, Rick, when I was doing the documentary just a few months ago, and in the area of Magdala, of course, Mary Magdalene came from that area, where
Yes.
it had been said by some historians that the routing by the Romans had been so thorough that there weren't even synagogues in that area that we would call Galilee, and up by Capernaum and Magdala. And there had just been a recent discovery, and I was there able to walk through it and video it. This stunning discovery, archaeological discovery of a synagogue that would have been there about the year 100 AD. Strong possibility Jesus may even have taught there, but showing a very strong and vibrant Jewish community there. So that's sort of the derivation of the word, how it came, how it went, and how eventually it became resurrected, if I can use that word,
Yes.
in the battles that were ensuing after 1948. And the people that left, Rick, the people that, when the war was declared, literally the day after the United Nations gave that land, recognized it, didn't give it, the Jews were all living there. They'd been migrating back from there for years. The day after, there were 5 of the surrounding Muslim nations declared war on Israel. And the rest of the world, sadly, basically stood back and said, well, Israel, we recognize you, your right to exist as a Jewish state, but you're going to have to fight your own battles. And at that particular time, and the number can be disputed, but about 500,000 people who would identify as Muslim or Arab were told by the 5 nations, get out of Israel because we're coming in, we're going to wipe them out. And somewhat over 500,000 left, thinking that the 48 war would be quick and that they would return. At about the same time, almost 1 million Jews from those Arab lands, those Muslim countries, were effectively kicked out. They were told they had to leave or they would be killed. So 2 things were happening at once. You had a mass in-migration of Jews from Arab and Muslim countries who were being exiled. And so Israel, just with very little resources and very little wherewithal, took them all in. To this date, Rick, since 1948, none of the Muslim countries which surround Israel will take in the Palestinians who left in 1948. They refuse to take them in. It's something that just doesn't get the type of recognition that it should. The Muslim nations which surround Israel and surround Gaza and what we call the Palestinian areas, that particular stream of Islam is so toxic that the other Muslim nations will not even take them in.
So the United Nations right now have consistently accused Israel of war crimes, yet other nations that do far more than Israel seem to be ignored. Now, as a former minister of human rights in Canada, why do you think the UN is so hard on Israel right now?
Well, keep in mind, Rick, on that important question, the United Nations themselves are populated, and some might argue a majority of those nations are not what we call truly democratic nations. They do not
Right.
share what we call Western values, which were built on the Judeo and the Christian history that we've known for ages. They are very much opposed to Israel and the very fact that it exists. And so you will constantly see resolution after resolution every year at the UN where Israel is criticized for one thing, but other nations and places in the world where far more horrific things are happening don't get the same criticism. The business of war crimes, for instance, we all know, and I think we'd agree whether we're pacifists or not, war is horrific, war is
Yes.
horrendous, and
Yes.
tragedy happens in wartime. In any war, in any military engagement, citizens get killed, innocent people get killed. It's heartbreaking. It's been a reality since the beginning of time. Do you know, Rick, there are those agencies which actually keep track of in a realistic way, not Hamas statistics, but realistic down through history. This ratio, there's actually a ratio that gets determined of militants versus citizens versus non-militants that get killed in a particular campaign. For instance, the bombing and the firebombing of German cities done by the Allies in the Second World War, and people still argue about it, but there's no question, it was in the hundreds of thousands of citizens who were killed.
Yes.
And that was a decision that was made at the time to stop the Nazis. I was just in Japan again. I'd been there many times. I was visiting the sites of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And again, many non-militants were killed. Again, these are the tragedies, the great tragedies of war. But Israel is recognized, other than by Hamas itself, Israel is recognized, especially in this latest campaign, as having by far the lowest ratio of non-militants to militants that are killed in a campaign. For instance, much lower than when President Clinton took on the bombing campaign related to Bosnia. Many non-militants were killed, and that was seen as that was part of the tragedy of war. When the U.S. and many other nations took on the formidable task of actually eliminating ISIS, which they basically did some years ago, the ratio there was very high, unfortunately, of
Yes.
non-militants in the cities who were killed. The degree of the degree to which the IDF, the Israeli forces, go before they go into an area to attack or to hunt down the actual Hamas killers, they notify. It's never been done before in war before. They notify people in the area, please
Notify
get out of
them.
that area. They fly over, they drop leaflets.
Yes.
They do phone, they put in phone calls where they can. They use megaphones. They say, please get out of that area, because the Hamas militants, we know now, and even the UN is finally admitting it, they set up in hospitals, they set up in schools, they put their artillery equipment in medical centers. And because of that, unfortunately, non-combatants are killed. When that happens accidentally, Israel always acknowledges it and steps up and takes responsibility for it. But going back to the ratio, and I'm sorry to some of your viewers if it sounds harsh that we can talk about ratios, but the ratio of non-militant to militant death in this particular campaign conducted by Israel is far lower than we have seen in any military campaign in history.
So the enemy of Israel is not the Palestinians, it's Hamas. It's the terrorist route. And most of us know that Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism in the region. Now, this is a question from a political, economical I want to ask you. Is there any political or financial gain fueling the logic behind Iran by investing billions of dollars arming Hamas and Hezbollah to destroy Israel? Is there any financial gain there at all? Or is this just a continual family feud?
Rick, it is in the eyes of the Iranians, it is the spiritual gain that they are looking for. They are a
The
theological
spiritual.
regime, and it's known and it's stated by themselves that each of their imams, especially the Ayatollah, they dream of the day when they would be the Ayatollah who would be the one that would exterminate Israel. They dream of that. They talk about it. We refuse in the West, for some reason, we refuse to take them seriously. It is the main reason that Iran wants to secure the nuclear capabilities. I can tell you, Rick, and most analysts will agree on this, military analysts, defense and security analysts, about 2 seconds after the Iranians achieve ballistic capability to launch nuclear weapons, they will do it because it is their stated spiritual goal. It is their sworn goal to their God Allah that they will evaporate Israel. So this is where the Hamas Hamas used to be part of, flowed from what's called the Muslim Brotherhood, which again is
Yes.
pretty toxic stream of Islam. They've moderated slightly in some years, but in 1988, Hamas, if you can believe it, said the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't violent enough, and that's when they formed their own charter. Their charter, Rick, the Hamas charter, states in writing they have two goals. That is to evaporate Israel and to kill Jews all the time, everywhere. So when I see these crowds of people, and at times I've gone up to some of the individuals, even in the crowds, or some of the university deans who refuse to talk about this to their students. And I've said, do you realize Hamas does not want a two-state solution? Hamas does not want to negotiate. They want all Jews dead everywhere, and they want Israel vaporized. So that's the common thread between Hamas and the Iranian regime. Iran is very pleased and of course was involved, we know, financially, and we know through expertise, the building of the infrastructure of tunnels through Gaza and in those
Miles.
areas. And Hamas and Iran, of course, completely finances Hezbollah on the northern border. And people need to know, Iran has one goal from their spiritual leaders, and their leaders are the ones who control the country. That is to evaporate Israel and kill Jews. And that's why they have the common cause with Hamas. And unfortunately, Rick, you mentioned the Palestinian people. Since the elections in 2005, it is the fear and the domination of Hamas in politics in the Palestinian area and in Gaza. They haven't had elections in 2006. They use the money that the United Nations, countries like Canada, the United Nations give to educate, to raise up two generations now of children and now adults who literally hate the Jews. You'll see in the documentary, you've probably seen it, heartbreaking scene of a 6-year-old Gazan Palestinian girl being asked what she wants to do when she grows up. And she says, I want to kill Jews. I want to stab them in the neck. I want to stab them in the head, and I want to kill them. The frightening part is that now the Palestinian population is overwhelmingly in favor of what happened on October 7th. They believe it was right for the murders and the rapes to happen. And this is obviously adding to the difficulty. It's not just that this rump group called Hamas, which has canceled all elections in 2006, They do control them. They torture their own people. They put to death their own people if there's even a hint of sympathy towards Israel. So the Palestinian people themselves, the huge majority, are actually in favor of what Hamas did and is doing.
And in the last several months now, you made a documentary called Life and Death Series. Where can people see this documentary, Stockwell?
Oh, thanks for asking that. The quickest way they could access it, if they just go to my website, stockwellday.com. When they go to stockwellday.com, they'll see up on the top banner on my website there, they'll see day-to-day show, and that's where that's one of the areas they can find it. They can just go on YouTube, and if they just go on YouTube and enter in almost any combination like day-to-day show, or you could enter um, Israel lessons learned day-to-day show, that will
And
bring it up.
you dive deep. You dive deep into this, don't you? You're right there in
We
Israel
really
when you
get
give
in, we
this.
really make it
Yeah.
granular, Rick, because the reason there was support, great support from U.S. Media sources on this, but also the Jewish community in Canada. Because, Rick, they were saying, we know that Christians have been with us, but where are they now? Where are the voices
Yes.
speaking out against what Hamas did? And they're a little bit surprised, not just in the evangelical community, but even the broader Christian community. There are some, Rick, as you know, yourself and others, who are
Yes.
bravely and unabashedly saying we stand with Israel, but many are not. And for many people, Rick, it's because of the narrative mainstream media puts out and that universities have put out now for 2 generations that people feel overwhelmed and in fear. So we're trying to give as much actual technical and very direct information. You look at that documentary, you can really drill down into some granular
Yes.
stuff, or you can take the higher level stuff that'll all work for you to help you to be informed and to be a part of what we hope is a rising tide of people who are standing up for Israel and saying, this is enough, it's
This
wrong, we
is.
stand with Israel.
Why do you think the main street media, why are they giving this information out that's so biased? Is there a reason for this?
Well, I believe there is, Rick, and it's not something that has just taken place recently. I mean, we know, and you know, your viewers would know that really we call it the overtaking of the heights of culture in North American and European society has been going on really for decades. And our academic institutions are the ones who train up. Many times it's the media, it's the historians they train up, the other academics. And what we are really seeing, and I'm sure your viewers are familiar with the term, something called cultural Marxism. Karl
Yes.
Marx, we knew, had a certain economic policy, this is back in the late 1800s, which was based on the fact that anybody who is successful financially, it must be because they did something wrong, they stole, or they're racist. And Karl Marx, his approach was it had to be a violent overthrow of the system. So that kind of economic theology, we can call it that, has spread into most areas philosophically of society historically. So now the cultural Marxists, and this is where we get the term woke, cultural Marxism says that if you are successful in North America or Europe, virtually in any field, it must be because you're racist. It must be because you stole, lied, or cheated. And so, taking the platform from Karl Marx program, you must be overthrown. And that's what the derivations of what we now call woke, seeing things through a woke lens. If you're successful, it's because you lied, cheated, stole, or were racist, and you will be overthrown. So that's embedded itself. Basically, media becomes wittingly or unwittingly a part of getting that message out. Everybody was fine, in terms of media and philosophically with Israel because they were a minority. They were a group that, I mean, the Holocaust, everybody virtually, other than in the Islamic world, were horrified. And so they
Yes.
wanted to see Israel supported up until 1967. all of a sudden Israel in that war showed that they are not a tiny little minority that's going to be pushed around. They can stand up for themselves, they can defend their country and win. And you can track pretty closely following the 1967 war. Now Israel couldn't be seen as a minority that could stand up for themselves. So Israel now becomes part of the target, and a very significant part of the target of a civilization that has to be taken down, that has to be destroyed. And media, unfortunately, because philosophically they buy into cultural Marxism, they see Israel as part of that problem.
So this is a global mindset, basically what you're saying. It's a global way of thinking that is
Very
causing
much so.
people to go a different way. And Marxism does not want God, does not want the Ten Commandments, does not believe in Jesus Christ. They do not want a Judeo-Christian moral culture to exist. So here's a question concerning Canada and North America. We have today a large amount of illegal undocumented aliens entering into Canada and the US. I think there's over 10 million now have entered the US. And many of them are now protesting in support of Hamas. The World Economic Forum has a narrative that supports a world without borders. Do you think that the folks who have come to Canada supporting Hamas could be part of a much larger plan within the World Economic Forum to have a world without borders? Is there a mindset that's taking place globally, like for a one world government?
Well, you've made some significant and important statements there, Rick, and let's just unpack some of that because it's important that we do so. Just on immigration policy alone, and for a number of years, I was the Minister of Public Safety in Canada. That
Yes,
would be the equivalent to Homeland Security in the United
yes,
States. So I had both the privilege and the responsibility of working with intelligence and security agencies around the world, including, by the way, with Islamic countries who are worried about some of these very toxic forms of Islam within their own governments. And it's very clear that if any country that does not have borders or borders that are protected, in fact, will cease to be a country after a while. And it is a known tactic, if we can use that, that many terrorists, and that would include Islamic terrorists, know that if they can get to South America, Central America, get to Mexico, they can get into the United States right now. Unfortunately, that's the tragic truth. It's not something, I don't even see it as something, Rick, that as much as I have concerns with the World Economic Forum, and I've attended there twice, when you broadly have a policy in place like cultural Marxism, which
yes,
defines anything, and you mentioned God, anything even religiously based as evil, then there's just going to be the natural planning that will just kick into place in these countries and in these regimes saying those people, meaning us, are evil, and the only righteous thing to do is to kill them. And there's no question, and we are very worried about this, as has happened. And, Rick, many people worry about even talking about this issue. I'm glad you have the courage to discuss it. Because in Europe, for instance, many people warned for decades that European countries would be overwhelmed with another culture that, in fact, is not something most of their citizens endorse. So this is what has happened. And much of it, many of the problems have been because of massive illegal immigration. It's the huge
yes,
majority, up to 90%, is young men coming in very militant, and they're absolutely convinced in their own minds and hearts that anything that looks like Christian or Jewish culture or religion or history must be destroyed. It's part of this. It's now become the Islamic extreme
yes.
Islamism is now meshed with this militant cultural Marxism into a highly explosive, I'll use that word, combination. So unfortunately, and I hope I'm wrong on this, and those people who believe in prayer should be praying, that we know it's actually untold numbers of immigrants, illegal immigrants, I'm careful to say this, coming into the U.S. These are going to materialize continually into some disastrous, heartbreaking, horrendous situations in the U.S. It's not too late to stop it. There doesn't seem to be a willingness on the U.S. government side to stop it, but it's going to continue. In Canada, the fear of it, it's not quite as dramatic because people have to make their way all through the U.S. and then cross
Yes.
the Canadian border, which they have been illegally. I think I'll say with a bit of a smile, we have weather on our side. Terrorists who have been grown up, living in the Middle East and enjoying 365 days of beach time. The thought of ice and snow in Canada isn't all that appealing. Though when I was Minister of Public Safety, we arrested a group. We were able to, because of our good work on our security forces, a group of Islamist-oriented terrorists who had planned to destroy what is known as the CN Tower, the biggest landmark in Toronto, attack Parliament buildings, behead our Prime Minister. We were able to intercept that after careful surveillance. And those people were arrested and put in jail. But Rick, this is a very real concern. So it happens to mesh also. Now, do I think that Klaus Schwab, who heads up WEF, is sitting around at night making all the phone calls to terrorist leaders? He doesn't even
No.
have to,
No.
because the World Economic Forum has already said, as a policy, that that the economic system, again, needs to be turned upside down, as a cultural Marxist would want to see happen. And there
Yes.
needs to be an overarching control in terms of monetary policy. And the reason I don't call it a conspiracy, Rick, is because they're so open about it. And one of the
Yes.
lines, which has now it's almost become a meme, but is one of the lines, and it's a clear commitment from the World Economic Forum, is that you will own nothing, you will rent, and you will be happy.
Yes.
And it's not even a conspiracy. There has always been, down throughout time, go back to the Tower of Babel, as people move away either from a belief in God or a belief and a respect for individuals and individual rights, you move away from either of those two, you will always see the result being a tight group of people who think they are smarter than everybody else, think that their way to control the world is the best way, and they will kill, destroy, and imprison anybody in their path. That's been all the way down through history. We're seeing it. We're seeing the hope of that being revived in much
Yes.
of today. Immigration is a part of that. I'll close that thought out, Rick, by saying there was just a by-election in Canada. For your American viewers, a by-election is somewhat similar to when a congressperson or a senator either resigns or dies, and then a special election is called in that district. And one of the policies of the federal Conservative Party, which is open to legal immigration, very embracing of that,
Yes.
but opposed to illegal immigration. And people are getting tired of the violence, especially in the streets of Toronto, with
Yes.
people who are coming in here in questionable ways. And it actually resulted in a stunning turnaround in a constituency that has been a 35-year liberal stronghold. A 20% swing on the vote, like, it is just blowing people away. And it's as a result of this kind of liberal thinking. They've extended their hand too far. People are too upset when they've seen the attack, whether it's on their ability to raise their families the way they want, their ability to pursue their own economic interests and freedom of enterprise, their ability to have true freedom of discussion in universities. People are getting tired of it, Rick. I hope that fatigue is going to result in positive electoral results that can turn the
Yes.
tide of this. I'm not convinced
Yes.
of it. I'm hoping and praying for it, but we'll see.
Well, you mentioned two things. You mentioned Klaus Schwab from the WEF, and half of our Canadian Senate are now WEF graduates. And in 2021, the Canada called for increased climate ambition changes, and they stepped up and announced a doubling of its international climate finance from 2.6 billion to 5.3 billion. Now, both Canada and the US have signed over to the World Health Organization for global governance, global health governance. And all of this has caused incredible stress and high inflation within both countries. Now, you just said the Marxist agenda is to pull the nation down financially. Do you think that these policies, these global policies, are designed to help each nation's sovereignty, or is it a way of breaking us down financially and weakening our countries from the West for a globalist takeover of what many call a one world government, which we all know in the Bible, it says there will be a 7-year period where there will be a global government. Can you see these initiatives being taken place as a way of pulling the nation down financially? It doesn't seem to be helping us.
They certainly do pull down the nation, Rick. That's very true and very clear. I am not as an astute a student as you are in terms of the times and the years, but I know there's a lot of scholarly work has gone into that,
Yes,
and I applaud you for pursuing that. I can tell you, and be in concert with your thinking here related to when the more you have national governments submitting themselves to international structures, the
yes,
less freedom we are going to have. I mean, the whole the emergence of what we really understand as freedom in Canada, the U.S., and Europe go back as far as the Magna Carta. Some of your viewers were probably fortunate enough in school to have been taught that. But it's a giving of the control of one's destiny more to the individual, more to families, more to local communities, and less extreme power going to the top, because that will always result in the control of many people, the
yes,
brutal control of many people by a tiny few. And the only way, all through history, the only way a tiny, select, privileged few people can control a large mass of people is through extreme brutality and for people seeing and witnessing that brutality. So I'm not comfortable. Of course, we should work with international organizations. There can be things to be
absolutely.
gained to that. But what we've allowed in Canada in terms of giving up our sovereignty over the world, over some jurisdiction of the World Health Organization, for instance, to me is just unconscionable. And
Yes,
to also other agencies at the UN, when you give away the control of your own destiny to international organizations, especially which are literally foreign to the way you believe life should go, you're in trouble. So I would say we are in trouble if this trend continues. The trend has already gone far too far in terms of giving up our national sovereignty. And that's why I believe people are starting to wake up. You can see it in certain elections in Europe. And anytime this
yes,
happens, Rick, you'll know, being in the media, mainstream media, they lose their minds when they see these other parties, for instance, in Europe, that are basically conservative parties, winning election. They go completely
yes,
crazy. And they say, how is it, the media say, how is it that the common masses do not believe everything we tell them to believe? And I hope we're seeing a turn of this, a turn back to true respect for individuals, for humans, and for communities, respecting all religions and allowing people to truly live in freedom and not forcing them to accept what everybody else is saying or practicing. That's the fight that is on right now. And
yes,
biblical scholars are having the debate right now. Is Are we in the end times? I mean, I know that's a debate that's going on right now. I can say,
yes,
Rick, that from my, and I would call it elementary study of these things, because I know the Bible talks about certain things unfolding, certain things have to be in place before it happened. I've personally, on a historic basis, never seen so many things falling into place. If somebody wants to say that we're in the end times, they've probably
yes,
never had more proof of this than they have right now. Whether that
yes,
materialize, and even as our Lord says, of the time and the hour no person knows. But have things ever been as aligned as they are right now for the possibility that we are in the end times? They've never been so aligned as far as my understanding of worldwide history goes.
Well, this is what Prophecy USA tries to look at: a biblical viewpoint, and you cannot have a biblical viewpoint unless you look at the politics and at the nations. And we believe that the dots are joining, but we want to thank you, Stockwell, as a political viewpoint and a man that's had years and years in politics, not only nationally in Canada, but around the world. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on Prophecy USA. Thank you so much. Now, where can they see that documentary again that you've got?
Quickest thing is just go to stockwellday.com. That's my website,
StockwellDay.com.
stockwellday.com. And when the first page comes up, you'll see at the top of the page it says Day to Day Show. But you can also find it on YouTube. Just put in any combination of those words, it'll come up on YouTube, or it'll come up on my X or my Twitter site, Stockwell_Day. It'll come up there. Just an interesting thing, Rick. YouTube has actually declared one of the episodes to be only to be viewed by 18-year-olds and over. And I can assure you, we could have put a lot of really graphic, horrific stuff in there, but we didn't. But YouTube, which allows young people to watch the most horrendous things imaginable, has said on the one episode, you have to be over 18. Somebody told me, well, that'll help people to watch it because, if anything's restricted, everybody wants to watch it. But anyway, that's where they can find it at any one of those sites. And we have given, and I can say Daystar Television and others in the Jewish communities in Canada and others who have funded this have said they're not going to insist on proprietary rights. They want people to use it freely. You can't sell it. You can't take it and sell it, but you can use it freely as long as they get the credit. So people can use that for instructions in their churches or their homes or their synagogues. I was going to say, or their mosque. Rick, I'll close this thought. We work with a large group called the Imams Council. These are actually imams, Muslim imams, who are standing for Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. They've signed a document to that. They've put their lives on the line. So, I have hope. And, of course, we know where our greatest hope is.
Yes, we do. Well, Prophecy USA would like to thank you. Of course, we look at a biblical perspective. We thank you for your political views. It's been absolutely amazing hearing what you have seen in the trenches in Canada and around the world in the political realm. Thank you once again, Stockwell, for being with us.
Thank you to Rick, the good work you do, and to your viewers.
Folks, we trust you enjoyed that interview with Stockwell Day. Join us next week as we continue to unveil the hidden mystery of America's role in Bible prophecy. This is Prophecy USA. My name is Rick Pearson, reminding you that God is in control, Jesus Christ is alive, and He's coming back much sooner than many people think. See you next week. Shalom.